What's that say? Go ahead, tell me, what's it say?
Well, in effect, it says those two intrepid voyagers into the unknown returned from the unknown in a slightly dented aircraft.
What about the picture? Who's in the picture?
Hello, and welcome to the Twilight Pwn, a podcast that discusses each and every episode of the Twilight Zone. My name is John. I'm joined by my co-host, Fred.
Hello.
How you doing this week, Fred?
I'm a little sick, so I apologize in advance to the listeners. We're recording on a different day. If we had recorded on a normal day, I would be in good health, but someone had to take in the delights of the red carpet.
Well, you know, as a filmmaker, Oscar season is quite important.
What was your favorite award?
My favorite award?
That's a weird question to ask.
Yes, I've always been a production
Audiences are
design
huddled
man.
around the TV. What's your favorite award?
Yeah, this was the first year in a while where I haven't seen all the best pictures before the ceremony. I'm still playing catch up. I've got 3 to go, so listeners will be excited to get my Oscar predictions here in another week or two.
I was. Well, it was kind of Twilight Zone. The Birdman one. That was a bit of a shocking twist for a lot of people.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I thought I was under the impression that Boyhood was supposed to win. I haven't seen either movie, but
well, we can really get in depth.
Okay.
I think.
So slight tangent, but I think the listeners will want to hear this. So my friend was on a date recently. This is someone we went to college with. I'll tell you her name after the cast.
Okay.
And I don't know how conversation turned to this, but she was talking about podcasts with her date, and somehow our podcast came up. And get this, the guy had heard it.
Well, sure. I mean, maybe not in the sticks, but in New York. That's what everyone's talking about at Club 54.
Club 54, nice. Do you think he was just trying to butter her up? But that would be a really weird way to be like, oh yeah, I've listened to that Twilight Zone podcast. That would be the strangest way to brag and get in good with a date.
Fred, at this point we have literally thousands of listeners, so the odds of people hearing the cast is pretty high.
True. All right, well, a special shout-out to those two lonely listeners. But we got to get down to business, which is this week discussing an episode called...
And When the Sky Was Opened, a first-season episode, actually the 11th of the production run, very early in the run. First aired originally on December 11th, 1959.
Her name, X-20. Her type, an experimental interceptor. Recent history, a crash landing in the Mojave Desert. After a 31-hour flight 900 miles into space. Incidental data, the ship with the men who flew her disappeared from the radar screen for 24 hours. But the shrouds that cover mysteries are not always made out of a tarpaulin, as this man will soon find out on the other side of a hospital door.
So that was Serling's intro. Ha ha ha. Due to some production issues, we didn't actually hear it, but I'm sure it was hilarious. We like to do our own Serling-style intros. I'll go ahead and go first, if you don't mind. Her name, X-20. Miss 20, if you're nasty. Her type, men in uniform. Recent history, taking 3 unsuspecting lads on a little trip to heaven and dumping them back to Earth on a re-entry of shame. Current location, a softly lit hangar bay, covered in a silky sheet to preserve her mystery. Incidental data, the ship with the men who flew her disappeared from a radar screen for 24 passionate hours. Thankfully, what happens in the Twilight Zone stays in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I was just noticing when we heard what we could of Serling's intro, it has a very, Playboy centerfold feel to it, doesn't it?
She's a small Midwestern spaceship.
Nose cone 30 meters.
Yeah.
Fuselage
Wingspan
20 meters.
out of this world. Let's spend the rest of the podcast spaceship as sexy woman. Puns.
Yep.
All right, you go.
My name, the X Serling. My game, television writer extraordinaire of the Extraordinaire E, with a penchant for people who are misplaced in time and space. Tonight we play a game of legerdemain with a list of the names of the people aboard a certain astrobound flight. One Colonel Clegg Forbes, space jockey and rocket ragamuffin recently returned from the far reaches of space, will attempt to tackle this manifest mystery with his fellow crewmen. Or should I say crewman? Or should I say the Twilight Zone?
That was another John pun for the ages. Was it ledger domain listed the names?
I feel confident that one hasn't been made somewhere else, but maybe I don't. There's always a chance.
Daguerreotype, daguerreotype.
Yeah. Daguerreotype, daguerreotype. That one, someone's come along.
That's just a cliche at this point.
It's well-mined territory.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, this is the first season episode of The Twilight Zone, so check it out before we get going because we're going to spoil the plot. It's available to stream on Netflix, Hulu, not on YouTube, but of course you can buy the DVDs, Blu-rays, and check it out. So let's get going with the plot. We open up with this X-20 spaceship, which Serling seems to have a bit of a crush on. It is very attractively shot.
Nothing but a sheet.
Exactly. It's what you cover up, not what you reveal.
Yeah, you can tell they put on the soft lighting. And there's the gauze over the camera to really make it pop.
Originally, it was scored with sort of porny saxophone music, but Bernard Herrmann overdubbed that. We cut away, and we're in an army hospital, and our protagonist, Colonel Forbes, one of the pilots of the X-20, is walking nervously through the halls of this hospital to a door marked number 15. And the music is letting us know that something is very ominous about door number 15.
There's a nurse who's just saying, "Room for one more, honey."
It's funny, but there is a lot of close parallels to 22. So the other guy in the hospital room is what's his name? Gart.
Yes, Major William Gart.
And Colonel Forbes is talking to him, and Gart is kind of riffing around, but Forbes is having none of it.
Hey, can I get a quick hot or not in?
Ooh, I got one too.
Yeah, I've got two.
Ooh, I have two too.
I thought Gart looked somewhat like a young Peter Dinklage and somewhat like a young Tom Hanks.
I can see it. In the face, he's got a sort of a Dinklagey face going on. The Tom Hanks I don't see as much.
Bosom Buddies era Hanks or something.
He's got a sweet open face.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
I actually have my two hot or nots on Colonel Forbes.
Oh, I think I've got a Forbes hot or not, but yeah, hit me. I don't think we're going to have the same one.
I'm guessing yours is going to be someone that only you've heard of.
Yeah, pretty much.
Mine was, in a certain light, he looks like a young Robin Williams, and in a certain light, he looks like Bill Pullman. Or Paxton.
Okay, yeah, I can see the Bill Pullman, and mine is definitely one you'll probably just not understand. When he gets really excited and he gets the crazy eyes, I thought he looked like former NFL coach turned commentator John Gruden. But
whoosh. Yeah, no. Over my head, yeah.
All right.
But all the tough jock listeners, I'm sure, will get that one right away. Forbes is upset, and even lighting a soothing cigarette in a hospital room doesn't calm him down. He's upset about something. He's trying to recreate what happened since the crash in the X-20, and he asks Gart to read this paper. We get a close-up of it, and yet again, disappointingly,
yes,
there's no building code under fire, and there's no petition against attacks.
No, but I did find that eye-catching banner lead about the late sports result pictorial enticing.
Yes. Yeah. What I thought was kind of funny is
that was one of the most generic things.
Yeah.
Late sports result.
Yeah. Exactly.
What result? What sport?
It's late, John. That's what's newsworthy.
Yeah.
Sports
we'll know
results.
what kind of game happened, later.
Yeah. Details are currently sketchy. I did like how the newspaper headline, which is all about the X-20 flight, refers to it as two spacemen returning. I don't know, just something about a major newspaper calling a pilot a spaceman. It seems
I wonder
not
when
technical.
Terminology of astronaut, came into the public consciousness.
Two moonmen return. But the upsetting thing to Forbes is not the lack of building code under fireness. It's the fact that there's only two spacemen, not three spacemen. He remembers there being three of these spacemen.
And I was going to call Major Gart Major Fart, but I won't do that.
But I won't do that.
I'm better than that.
We have a certain quiet dignity around this podcast.
So Major Gart isn't buying.
Hey, you got off on a toot, didn't you?
Nice, John.
Yeah, I'm just going to hold on to that from now on.
Ah, Major Fart and his toots. You missed us, admit it. We've been gone for a week. I really like just how simple the setup is, but how kind of eerie it is right at the beginning. I mean, it's like a hospital room set, 2 guys in military things, and a fake newspaper, and it's just the number 2 where the number 3 should be. But it's really well sold, and you're kind of like freaked out by it. I really like it. Another Twilight Zone episode that gets a lot of unease out of something very simple. So Forbes remembers this third guy, Harrington, the third X-20 pilot. He was the cute X-20 pilot.
Kind of the Pete Best of the X-20 pilots at this point. Most people don't remember him.
Yeah, exactly. They pushed him out during the Teddy Boy phase of the X-20 program. They talk about how Harrington... Did you notice he was 36?
I did not, but a listener did.
Oh.
So a listener alerted us to that fact. Thank you very much to Leslie C. for noting that, among other neat deets.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed it on first watch.
Well then Leslie, stop writing. Leslie. We've got the experts.
Yeah, I'm the expert on knowing when people are saying 36. I'm very good at it. You know, Rod Serling always liked to have his male protagonist be 36 and have them go through crazy stuff. So I like to.
Not many people know Rod Serling was 36 during the entire Twilight Zone run.
Exactly.
It's one of those Twilight Zone mysteries.
Yeah, and so it's really not that shocking that he's disappeared strangely. It's a very common thing at age 36. Gart doesn't remember Harrington. And I thought that the way that they sold it was very clever and cool, because when Forbes is like, remember Harrington, he's 36, Gart's initial reaction is like, oh yeah, like kind of the way you would pretend to remember somebody, just like racking your brain. It's not just like, that guy never existed. You know, he reacts the way you'd react if someone was bringing up some obscure figure. But quickly it comes out that indeed Gart doesn't remember any Harrington. He doesn't ever remember any Harrington existed, which is obviously quite disturbing. So Forbes then takes this opportunity to tuck Gart in for a little bedtime story and tell him the story of the missing Harrington.
Yeah, this part slightly confused me. I couldn't tell if we were witnessing a flashback or if it's just a narrated description. And I mean, granted, they might be kind of the same thing, but
yeah,
I guess it creates a question of like authorial trust. Because like if it's a flashback, I guess I assume it's right. But if it's him telling the story, then I have an possibly unreliable narrator. So I just got a little confused what I was looking at.
Well, if it's a flashback, like what's the presumption about what the characters are doing in the room? Like just sitting there while one guy remembers it?
Yeah, exactly. So that also was confusing.
I'm just going to sit here quietly for 26 minutes. Just look at my face and try and read what's happening.
Right.
I like the concept that instead of a flashback or the narrator telling it, it's a dramatic reenactment.
Right.
Anyway, the dramatic reenactment starts with Forbes and Harrington, the guy who supposedly disappeared, in the hospital room, riffing around with Gart.
Playing some grab ass with Gart.
Kind of. Sort of just riffing about how they're all career alcoholics. And we get the newspaper again taunting us with no building code, but we do see that there are 3 spacemen on it. So I don't know. I guess that backs up Forbes, you know.
When we only have the one newspaper and him saying 3, you know, it's one thing. But to see it in print, then you know it's real.
Exactly.
It's another example of what you're talking about, of like getting a pretty impressive effect from so little. I mean, most of this episode rides on the fact that they have 3 different prop newspapers. Yeah. So that's pretty good.
No, it's true. I mean, they really could have like filmed, you know, this thing on stock sets that were being used for sitcoms. It's all of the like science fiction of it is fake newspapers, which is kind of impressive. So anyway, the dramatic reenactment continues when the 2 recently discharged from a hospital Navy pilots go out to get boozy. They go bird dogging at a local big band jazz bar. And apparently Harrington and Forbes are big heroes for crashing their ship. Because the bartender
hey, come on now,
comes out and comps them big glasses of mostly foam.
On the second beer, it's clearly a very bad pour. So then I started thinking, wait a minute, is the bartender in on what's ever going on? Because he doesn't seem like a real bartender.
He's clearly just like an actor playing a bartender, because he's got a real like rough around the edges, like, hey, boys, pull up a bar stool, and they just go spraying everywhere. You know what I mean? So they set up shop next to Single Hottie at the bar and try out their new spaceman negging routine on her. This may be crossing over into non-clean territory. But did you...
I was wondering if we'd talk about this. I think I know where you're going, but go ahead.
Her sort of like abnormally pointy breasts and lack of bra.
Right. There was a very shelf quality to those.
Yeah.
It was odd, and maybe it was the fashion of the day.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like, there was a certain quality to 50s breasts. They were pointier than breasts of other eras.
Yeah, I don't want to get too deep into it.
Let's take a deep dive into this subject.
Most men watching the episode probably were like, huh, that's odd.
Did that mean that, like, the average adolescent sort of fantasizing about a naked woman imagined, like, pyramidal breasts or something like that?
I don't know.
All right. Clearly you want to move on. Just as Harrington is about to light up, a strange expression comes over his face. He's sort of woken up out of the stupor by the match burning his finger. He drops a glass of beer. Thankfully, Forbes is on hand to get down on his hand and knees and suck it out of the linoleum. But the damage is done, and it's surprising. It's very cool how they do it. He just kind of gets a weird expression on his face. He doesn't... I mean, it's exaggerated, but the average Twilight Zone, like, surprise note is like a character yelling, zooming in on their face, and sweat pouring down their brow. And I thought just the look that comes over his face was sort of well played. This is sort of a random note, but did you think it was intentional that there were pictures of airplanes in both the hospital and the bar?
Oh, that's a level of production design that I did not notice, but I'm assuming yes, it was.
Yeah, I kind of wonder whether they just, like, ran out of money for more pictures, but, like, even so, it's kind of cool. I mean, in the hospital, you kind of can understand that, because it's a military hospital, presumably a Navy hospital, but in the bar, there's a picture of an airplane kind of, I think, sort of pointed down, actually. So I thought that was kind of cool. It's like the spoons in the room or something.
Right. Now you're talking my language. Now I'm back on board.
So Harrington has a strange feeling, which mostly manifests itself as sweat.
I got a very funny feeling. Whew, I never felt anything like this before.
What kind of feeling?
It's like I didn't belong here. Like if I was to let myself go,
You'd what?
like I'd disappear.
I don't know. I really like that moment. Do you ever feel like when you're sick, you're kind of like, maybe I just feel this way because I'm sick right now, but you're kind of like holding on or something? Like,
I just thought he sounded like Corporal Emo right there.
who's Corporal Emo?
I thought he sounded like super emo the
Oh,
whole time.
okay. Yeah, he is.
That,
that is a bit kind of like Bright Eyes lyrics. Yeah, it is a little sad sack, but just, I don't know, just because it's like a military guy, he's struggling to explain a strange feeling. It's kind of unsettling in a cool way. I don't know. I dig it. Harrington goes to call his mommy and his daddy, and we cut away. Some time has passed, and this weird, like, negging routine is getting increasingly esoteric because Harrington reveals that he called his mom and dad, and they don't know who he is. So this is like the most long con routine to pick up the woman with the pointy breasts. Forbes knows that the cure is another brewski. But on the way over, he looks down at a table and there's a paper on it that says it was only 2 spacemen. And he looks up and Harrington isn't in the phone booth anymore. Again, I just thought that was so well handled. It's just like no puff of smoke, no, dramatic, crappily done special effect. Just a character looks down, looks up, and the other character's missing. In a way that, like, there's some ambiguity, like he could have just walked out of the room.
It definitely is a good course in simplicity.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were probably directors who might have tried to handle this with effects, and given the technology of the day, it would have come off a lot worse. So
Harrington not only is gone from the bar, but nobody can remember him being there, including the bartender and the lady in need of a power sander for her bra. And so he leaves the bar kind of Jimmy Stewarting on his way out. You're all crazy. When he gets home, he's making some calls, and his wife shows up, which casts a nice light over him trying to pick up the woman at the bar. What did you think of that? Like,
well, I noticed that her chest was much more up to today's standards, so I can understand why he'd be out looking.
Careful chest analysis from the boys at the Twilight Pwn. I almost feel like it was Rod who wrote the screenplay, right? The teleplay for this?
Yeah.
Almost just like forgot that just a second ago his character was in a bar macking on a honey. Or was it just like, it was totally unserious? Because in a weird way, it's almost like creating like some HBO anti-hero. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of True Detective parallels going on right now.
But do you know what I mean? Like, they would never do, like, this guy's clearly supposed to be like a good guy.
He could have been just wingmaning for Harrington.
True. And I mean, I guess the attitude of the time is just like, boys will be boys. But rarely would they show that in such close proximity to the wife. You're the married one, so you're going to have to tell me.
I mean, no, I wouldn't behave in that manner, but I also didn't really get much of a reaction from it watching the episode. Yeah. I just assumed he was playing wingman.
Got it. I'm quite familiar with that from our days at NYU.
As a resident wingman, you'd be better positioned to analyze this.
Sadly, listeners don't know how accurate that is based on our NYU adventures. Anyway, so Forbes' wife doesn't remember Ed Harrington either.
He's starting to get pretty miffed about everyone's not remembering Harrington.
Yeah.
Who's Ed? Ed. Harrington. You know him, Amy. Ed, you've met him 100 times. Ed, we've been to dinner together. We've been to dances together. Ed, we've double dated Ed.
We had a polyamorous relationship with him.
There's something funny about screaming, Ed, we double dated Harrington. Is that his nickname?
Yeah.
It starts to sound a lot like a Christmas story, like the double dog dare.
Yeah. It's a weird detail to bring up. It's like slowly escalating, finally arriving at, we double dated with him, Cindy.
Yeah.
But anyway, even the shock of the double date doesn't rock Forbes' wife to her very core. Forbes has had enough talking to this woman, and he calls a man the general.
And the conversation goes somewhat similar.
Ed Harrington! Ed Harrington! Why doesn't anybody remember me?
It's definitely one of those episodes where like 50% of the lines are Ed Harrington.
Right.
You know? So Forbes is kind of going slowly crazy. And he backs away from his wife, muttering stuff about Ed Harrington. As one of our Twitter followers pointed out, does it look like he's... Were you worried he was backing towards a window? It definitely has the feel of a window death, for sure.
I will say I did start to get that tingle.
Yeah, exactly. The shot is great, though, because like he's inside, sort of in his like cozy domestic environment. And as he backs out of a window, but it's the sort of a door
balcony,
window,
right?
Out onto the balcony or a patio or something. He's outside, and you can see the stars, and he's kind of like disappearing into the unknown, you know, as he goes slowly crazier. I thought that was just a really masterful directorial choice. Like, he could have just been in the room and ran out of the door.
No. This is a gag, isn't it? That's what it is, isn't it, Amy? This is a gag. This is a big, earth-shaking, highly complicated and fantastically conceived practical joke, isn't it?
This is an incredibly depressing gag, isn't it, Amy? You know,
an incredibly well-constructed freak out, isn't it?
Yeah. So often in, you know, episodes with something like this, or really any plot with something like this, the character does have the line of like, this is a joke, isn't it? And sometimes it seems to be implied that the character actually believes it could be a joke, whereas in this, it seems clear to me that he knows it isn't, even as he's saying it, you know? Which I thought was
he does
cool.
come to the, like, it's all just a gag pretty late in the game.
Yeah.
You know,
True.
if he had said it early, it might have played the other way, but yeah, it's clear he's pretty desperate right now and can't even buy it as he's saying it.
Yeah.
So, well played.
So Forbes runs back to the bar to try and find Harrington. He can't. He Hulk smashes everything. Shouting. He just kind of burst through the window shouting, Harrington! So he does go through a window. He survives it. But I think that kind of a little slight check, like with a number 2 pencil. And suddenly he's alone in the bar. No one's even there to see him raging. And he kind of ends up just, you know, going from shouting Ed to kind of pathetically going like, Ed? Did you think he was playing it up too much, like maybe going to pieces a little too intensely for someone in the military?
Oh, I don't know. I think anyone could have a pretty bad reaction in these circumstances.
I mean, if you lose someone you've double dated with, that is that is shocking. I believe you and
Fred,
I actually have
you
double
remember
dated.
Ed Harrington, right? This is a hell of a Fred. Ed Harrington. You'd be upset.
Fred Harrington.
Oh my God, that's gold.
That better stay in the edit. that ends the flashback / dramatic reenactment, and we're back in sort of the episode's present moment with Gart listening to Forbes tell the story. I wonder if Forbes told Gart the part about curling up in the phone booth at the bar with Harrington's sweater and like crying himself to sleep while saying, Ed, Ed. So Forbes arrives at the same conclusion that Harrington did, which we kind of jumped over this, but Harrington had surmised earlier that something had gotten a hold of them when they went up in the X-20 and let them go accidentally, and now it was sort of coming back for them.
Right. It's kind of a Final Destination type plot coming in place. Well, I guess that is the 22 parallel, isn't it?
Yeah. Sort of like fate got a hold of them, and now it wants them back. He's tried every other possibility, and now he's arrived at the conclusion that Harrington must have been right, and then that feeling starts to come over him, the same one that Harrington had in the bar. At first, it kind of looks like he's having a good trip instead of a bad trip.
The brown M&Ms kick in.
Yeah. Stash gets a little gnarly. And he runs over to the mirror and starts yelling and charges out of the room. And Gart goes charging after him, but it's too late. He's disappeared, presumably around a corner. And when we get back, Nurse arrives to tend to Gart, just to lighten the mood. Did you think she was really cute?
I don't recall her.
Okay. I just thought she was like really a very cute extra. There's a lot of hotties in this episode. The spacemen themselves, I think, are attractive men.
Was this directed by that one horn dog?
Lamont Johnson.
No, it's not a Johnson. I don't know how that happened.
It's not a Johnson special. It's not a Johnson red light special. Maybe the listeners can weigh in, but I just thought on both genders this was a remarkably attractive
pound for
episode.
pound, one of the most,
one of the hottest.
It's like an MTV drama or something.
Exactly. It's like when they take like a real world crime and just recast it with a really attractive actor. Kato Kalin is played by Brad Pitt or something. Anyway, so the nurse is tending to Gart, and he is asking her like, hey, look out for that guy Forbes. And she doesn't know what he's talking about. And when he gets back into the room, he spins around and sees that instead of there being two beds there's only one. So clearly the same thing is going to happen to him. So then we see the paper again, and we see he was the lone spaceman.
A lot of mileage out of zoom-ins on newspapers here.
There was a new headline that I really enjoyed on this one. The headline was, "Food to cost less." I just love that.
I think that would be a legitimate one in like Russia, but
it's like a hard-nosed reportage. So we get some kind of clever camera shots, and Gart has a little freak out, and then we cut again, and then he's disappeared. And room 15 is empty, and then maybe unnecessarily we hear in Rod's outro that not only have all the men disappeared, so has X-20, her sexy self.
Once upon a time, there was a man named Harrington, a man named Forbes, a man named Gart. They used to exist, but don't any longer. Someone or something took them somewhere. At least they are no longer a part of the memory of man. And as to the X-20 supposed to be housed here in this hangar, this too does not exist. And if any of you have any questions concerning an aircraft and 3 men who flew her, speak softly of them, and only in the Twilight Zone.
Kind of weird way to end it there. It was like Rod's like, if you have any questions about these 3 men, I gotta go. So one of the things I really like about this episode is how well it combines very specific grounded details, like how old the characters are, like we went on double dates, like the specificity of their military careers, with stuff that's vague, like it's never explained exactly what this force is. The feeling that comes over them is never clearly described, like in anything more than vague terms. The method of their disappearance is sort of vague. And I think it really blends those things together totally well. Like sometimes the Twilight Zone, there's almost too much detail about the mysterious thing. It's like, there's a line right there, and if you walk over it, or an alien must have put this here or something. But I think it's such a pitch-perfect combination of the specific and the vague.
For me, when the plot started unwinding, I was just thinking of Back to the Future and the whole conceit of Marty has to fix the timelines or his siblings are going to disappear, and he has the handy visual reference of like them fading away from a picture.
Yeah.
And so I was able to I was just using that as a frame of reference to understand this episode. And it makes me think like, would this episode have been a little harder to grasp or confusing for an audience then who doesn't have some kind of similar thing. 'Cause, I don't know, I'm just thinking of how we sometimes think, oh, these episodes are obvious or we know where they're going or blah, blah, blah. This one I don't think is like that. I think it's a little more complicated. And like even the ones that we sometimes think are so obvious, we'll occasionally get to read a piece of listener mail or hear from an actor at the time who's just like, this was utterly baffling.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I could see this episode being a little more confusing than some for a viewer then. Because there's so little in the way of explanation.
Yeah, it's not like an alien got them or they died. Because it's not just that they died. It's not like the Final Destination thing. Because not only are they gone, but the entire memory of them is gone.
I guess I didn't even really think about it much until we just went through it. But it's like, and the plane goes too.
I know.
So at first I was thinking, yeah, I guess it's kind of like they died. But you're right. Their whole existence is gone. And somehow the plane gets wiped out too. So it's like, it's almost as if an alien race somehow wipes them out so that no one will ever come back. So they don't even know. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't really get caught up in thinking about those things at the time, but I wonder if it would be like frustrating for a viewer back then.
Oh, I think maybe like at the time because, you know, we hadn't breached the heavens yet, really.
Right.
Just, you know, like the idea of going into space was much more vague and mysterious, and so I think that like people would be intrigued by that, you know.
Right. Generally something bad could happen.
Yeah.
This is one possible reason.
One bad
one
thing
possible
that could happen.
outcome.
Yeah, like, oh, you might age at 100 years. Or,
right.
I feel like, you know, science fiction is like always sort of playing at the edge of like where science is, and like at the time that was very much, you know, what people were excited about scientifically. And
right.
So
I don't think I enjoyed this episode as much as I could have. The reason is I'm feeling a little disorientation fatigue. There's a lot of plots in the Twilight Zone that basically involve a person where suddenly people don't remember them and they have to work out what's happening. Like, and it's really unfair to judge this episode by that because it was the 11th of the run. You know, it wasn't well-worn territory at this point, but you know, we've been going in our own unique order. So I just wonder, did you have any issue with that?
Well, no. I mean, part of it is that I've seen this episode before, so like in my mind, I think I saw this before I saw the other ones. Like, it's Person or Persons Unknown is the other one, and what's the other one?
Yeah, and I mean, walking distance, people don't recognize
him
there. I mean, there's a lot of episodes where a guy's like walking around and people are can't remember him.
Twilight Zone just plays with like identity as a thing, but the idea of like people disappearing, I think, is the one that really comes to mind is the one where the dude's running around and like he doesn't exist, and like they open up the phone book and his mom is, you know, I think that one is Person or Persons Unknown. This one to me is the original and probably best version of that, because the other ones, it's like he's an actor and he like disappears into a movie, and that's sort of weird. Gets a little muddled. Then there's the other one, the one we're talking about, where it's like he wakes up and his wife is different, you know? I feel like each of the other ones is like this plus some weird gimmick that doesn't make it any better, you know? Like the horror of not being recognized or people disappearing to me is much more eerie and creepy if it's not clearly explained. Like, oh, you're going to wake up and you'll have a different face, or oh, you're in a play. Oh, you disappeared into a movie. So I think that this one is kind of like the, you know, the original article, and I think that's I hear you, but I think that this one is maybe the most pure version of that.
I intellectually understand it was first. I do think it probably, you know, is the best of those, but I can't help but just feel a little fatigue of kind of like, I've heard riffs on this story already, or seen riffs on this story already, just because of the kooky way we've gone through the series. So I don't think it like excited me in the way it might have.
But I agree with you, but I just think like the execution is so well done. Like the idea is not so exciting, you know, but like I felt like the performance by Forbes is awesome, and the way that the people disappear, I felt it's almost more about like filmmaking, like they just like edit the people out of existence, you know what I mean? I just thought
very Stalin-esque.
Well, yeah, I don't know, I just thought that like it's not particularly innovative, especially taken in light of the fact that they made like 12 different Twilight Zone episodes based on this idea, but it's just so well executed that it didn't bother me that the idea has, you know, found itself displayed other ways. This didn't really bother me exactly, but there is sort of a strange logical thing that's kind of wacky, which is that at the beginning, Forbes can remember both Gart and Harrington. Obviously, Gart still exists,
Right.
But when Forbes disappears, Gart can only remember Forbes. You know what I mean? Like, it's not clear to me why Gart can't remember Harrington.
Yeah, I mean, it's just maybe the order. I don't
No, but
know.
that doesn't make sense, because it's like, it's not that it's like the end of the world, because it's obviously this is something that is not real and shouldn't have to follow logical rules, but it's odd. Why would Gart only remember one of them?
Maybe because Forbes was the last person with Harrington, so he was fresher.
Yeah, but Harrington disappears from everybody who's around. Like, the bartender doesn't remember Harrington, you know?
Yeah, I don't know.
I got nothing.
What we doing next?
Bios and trivia. Bios and trivia. Bios and trivia. Yeah. Scott, Zickery, Mark Grams Jr., Zickery and Grams and IMDb.
According to IMDb, the title is a parody of a line from the children's nursery rhyme Sing a Song of Sixpence. When the pie was open, the birds began to sing, wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? I don't know if parody's the right word. Homage.
I'm very, very disappointed that this, like, eerie sci-fi episode refers to Pawn on Pies opening up, but yeah.
Here's one for the nerdier listeners. In Rod Serling's opening narration, we were told that the X-20 is an experimental Air Force interceptor that has been 900 miles into space. That altitude is far beyond the capability of fighter jets. Even if the X-20 did attain that high of an altitude, the aircraft and its crew would be exposed to the radiation of the Van Allen belts. By comparison, the space shuttle typically operates at altitudes between 180 and 240 miles. To be fair, in 1959, this was not understood yet.
Duh.
Hey, double hey. I was thinking when I was watching this episode, just because there's military and they're wearing their dress uniforms, so they've got their epaulets or whatever the proper term is on there.
A fruit salad.
I did have a fleeting exactly. I did have a fleeting thought, like, oh man, I bet someone's gonna complain about I bet a major isn't dressed in the right uniform. Luckily, IMDb was there for me. When Lieutenant Colonel Forbes and Colonel Harrington depart Major Gart's room, they both have their U.S. Air Force uniform covers / caps. Mm-hmm. Colonel Harrington's cap has, quote, scrambled eggs on the visor, as it should. However, Lieutenant Colonel Forbes' cap does not. This is an error, as all U.S. Air Force officers the rank of Lieutenant Colonel and above should have the scrambled eggs on their cap visors. This is current today, and it was policy in 1959.
Got their bases covered there.
Yeah, I know.
I was going to jump in with that, but
nope.
Anticipated my nitpicking.
Yeah, so that definitely knocks this episode down 1 point.
Yeah, for sure.
So, for hating the troops. How about you? Any trivia?
Yeah, Martin Grimm's has, sort of culled a lot of different things together. There's a lot of stuff about, the X-20 being based around sort of a U.S. Air Force real, sort of like speculative aircraft program. It's sort of interesting if you're interested in military history, but I think we've already covered enough of that. Apparently Rod Serling really liked this one, and because of the way it used sound, such as the sound of footsteps on broken glass, things like that. I did think that the sound was pretty good in the episode, which is something that you kind of rarely notice. But
yeah.
I thought that was cool. And then there was a funny little anecdote. Gloria Paul, who I believe was the triangular-breasted woman,
right.
Says to Grams, "My part was originally different than what you saw. I was supposed to be sitting at a table with 2 other girls," recalled Gloria Paul. "Rod Serling was on the set for the 2 days I was there, and when he saw me, he had the director change it, so I was moved up to the bar." I don't know, it's kind of creepy. It's like a strange combination of Rod horn-dogging on Gloria Paul and clearly sort of like writing sort of his own desires into Forbes' mouth. And then, all right, what about bios?
All right, so Rod Taylor played Colonel Clegg Forbes. He was also in a bunch of movies and television. Most notably, he was in H.G. Wells' The Time Machine and the lead in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. He was apparently considered for the lead role in Planet of the Apes, but he did not get that. Obviously, Charlton Heston. Taylor had completely retired from acting when Quentin Tarantino offered him the role of British Prime Minister Winston Churchill in Inglourious Basterds. That's, I believe
cool.
His last role. He was also considered for the John Saxon role in Enter the Dragon, but did not get that either. He also, I believe, just passed this year because during the Oscar telecast, I'm almost certain he was in the
in the In
the
Memoriam?
Memoriam tribute. Yeah.
Really? Wow. He died January 7th of this year, so yeah. R.I.P.
Charles Aidman played Colonel Ed Harrington. He was also in Little Girl Lost as Bill. We probably covered this
yeah.
before.
Sorry, he was the
yeah.
guy who was like, I don't know, Jeff, shut up. I'm trying to figure this out.
Yeah, it's probably one of those fifth dimensional things, you know.
Just
They
gotta
come
get
up
in
every
there
now and
turn
again.
this little doodad.
I think we covered this before. He was also the narrator of the 80s Twilight Zone series, so
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
cool connections. So Jim Hutton played Major William Gart. He was an interesting fellow. He was apparently considered the heir apparent of Jimmy Stewart in his day, which is kind of, I find interesting because I was getting a Tom Hanks vibe off him, which many people consider Tom Hanks the actual successor to Jimmy Stewart.
The official successor.
Right.
They had like a Dalai Lama-esque ceremony, right, where he was the first incarnation of...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, he had kind of a career that it didn't quite get going the way I think a lot of people anticipated. He was the father of actor Timothy Hutton. He died in
Who's Timothy
1979.
Hutton again? He's like the bad guy in The Rocketeer. Is that Timothy Hutton?
I don't know if that. I think that's Timothy Dalton.
Oh.
Timothy
Never
Hutton
mind.
is in.
Yeah.
For our younger listeners, Timothy Hutton is in Burn Notice.
Yeah.
I think. Wait, I think he's in one of those TNT shows. For the older people, the more discerning, he was an Academy Award winner for his performance in the Robert Redford movie Ordinary People, which is one of my
okay.
favorites. And it deals with death and loss in the family. And he started filming that just a few months after his own father had died. Keep moving. Maxine Cooper played Amy. I believe that's the wife. With her husband, she helped organize actors, writers, and executives to march in the 1960s with the Reverend Martin Luther King in Montgomery, Alabama.
Huh.
She also worked on a number of other causes, including protesting against the Vietnam War and nuclear weapons. Sue Randall was the nurse. You might remember as Millie in From Agnes with Love. Oh yeah, we both liked Millie, didn't we?
I think so.
I think she had like a hipster vibe
Yeah.
that we both enjoyed.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Good to know we're consistent in our horn dogging. Just to get the other side, I do think that the three male actors are quite the lookers for our listeners who prefer the gents. Definitely scope them out.
I thought Jim Hutton's, he's got an air about him.
Oh yeah, he's got that sort of naive.
He's got Jimmy
innocence.
Stewart, like friendly, aw shucks, but kind of funny.
Yeah, can't wait to corrupt him. Sorry, move on.
Paul Breyer played the bartender. He was uncredited as a policeman, and he's alive. Written by Serling, very, very loosely based on a on a Richard Matheson short story called Disappearing Act. Listeners, you'll be happy to know that I've started that short story. It's only, I'm sure, like 10 or 15 pages long. I'm about halfway through it. Sometime, in the next couple weeks, I'll tell you
Right.
it was pretty good, and I won't remember any more details. But so far, it's clear it's wildly different. So, directed by Douglas Hayes, who we've talked about before, and that brings us to the
Inevitable.
MST3K.
So we like to find connections between Mystery Science Theater 3000 and the Twilight Zone. What do we got this week?
This week we have two. Gloria Paul, a.k.a. Quadrangle Breasts.
Nice taking it up. I don't know what a quadrangle is, but dodecahedron breasts.
Right. Gloria Paul was the girl in the bar. She also played a moon girl in Commando Cody, the serial that ran throughout the first season.
A moon girl.
Yeah. Not unlike a spaceman. And S. John Launer was uncredited as Mr. Harrington.
I would assume it's the father's voice on the other end of the line.
Probably it. He was also in Third from the Sun and Praise of Pip and Purple Testament. I believe we've covered this before, but just to be safe, he was also in the MST episode I Was a Teenage Werewolf.
Yeah, we covered that one, but
All right.
double
Well, to hell with you.
dipped. Sorry.
All right.
All right. So what about ratings?
IMDb gives this episode an 8.6.
Pretty high.
Definitely puts it in the upper echelons.
Yeah, not like the highest, but in the top 20 or so. What'd you think?
I don't know. I don't know if it was circumstances. I just didn't I knew this was considered a really great episode, and I didn't walk away with this kind of wowed impression of it. And, you know, the performances were good, the story's fine. I just kind of, somehow it didn't grip me in the way that others have. I kind of feel like 6 plus or so. I don't think it's not one that I'm gonna think about very much moving forward. I don't think.
You're not gonna remember those sweet tetrahedral. All right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to disagree with. I don't know. Kind of
I don't have a strong thing. It's just for an episode that apparently is so beloved among them. I can't quite. It just didn't grip me a whole lot. I wasn't drawn into it as much as I guess the average person is, and I can't quite explain why. I can't, justify why something wasn't compelling to me exactly. It wasn't like it was poorly paced or poorly directed or poorly written. So I'm not saying it was sub 5. I'm just saying it didn't really hit me.
Yeah, well, listeners, brace yourself, because this is, I think, our biggest disparity yet. But I'm going to give this one a 10.
A 10?
Yeah, I really, really like this episode.
Have you ever given a 10?
Yeah,
Okay.
For the Bill Mooney episode. For it's a good episode.
It's a Good Life?
Yeah, It's a Good Life and Shadow Play. Those are my three.
Okay.
Those are my three.
Okay.
10. I think.
All right, now you got the burden of proof's on you. Back it up.
You gave a 10 to
the Christmas episode. It was delightful.
Yeah.
Yes, everyone agreed. We got lots of people saying you were right.
People agree with that on December 25th, but I think it's just very elegantly told. One thing we didn't talk about is how it's told mostly through flashback. It's not like a character wakes up and is like, people don't know who I am. Like, he comes into the room with a problem, so there's a sense of mystery right off the bat. Then it's told through a flashback. Then we get into the present day, and we're sort of filling in the backstory as we go. As I said, I like how it's really rooted in specific feelings and like they're not exactly regular people, but they feel like normal people dealing with something that's vague and unexplainable, and it's never really explained in a way that I find very eerie. It just kind of happens. I don't know. I just, I watched it, at least for this, podcast late at night, and I still kind of felt like a little spooked by it just when he disappears in that bar. And I guess it's one of these things that is hard to justify. I mean, I can talk about how it's well crafted, and, I think the performances are solid. I think you'd probably agree with that. And, it's certainly well made, but at the end of the day, it just kind of sends chills up my spine. And I think that it's hard to boil it down any further than that.
Huh. All right. Well, yeah, I believe that is the widest split we've ever had.
Podcast over.
This was all fun and games until now, Fred.
All right. Well, next week, that wraps it up for And When the Sky Was Opened Up. And next week, we're going to have another heated debate over Caesar and Me. An episode about a racial caricature ventriloquist doll.
Probably one of the best horror episodes the show's ever done. Am I right, Fred?
Yes.
Am I right? For pure horror.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you to the many, many people who requested And When the Sky Was Opened Up. Who were they?
Among them were Matthew on Twitter, Willow on Gmail, and EJ6385 on iTunes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to people writing in and telling you you're wrong about this one. It's going to be sweet.
I know. It's going to happen.
It's going to be sweet. I can't wait. Little personal shout out. I apologize to the contest winners who haven't received their prizes yet. They are forthcoming. There's just been a snafu with Amazon getting me the prizes. Hopefully it'll be resolved by the time this podcast comes out. So you should have your prizes soon. And also a nice little shout out to a listener named Gomez Adams, who recorded many years ago a sort of EP, I guess you could call it, of songs inspired by the Twilight Zone. He sent us a link to his Bandcamp page on Twitter, and the songs are pretty cool. I must say that, someone saying, I made some Twilight Zone inspired songs, I was like, uh-oh. But I clicked on it, and he's pretty good. So we're actually, what you're listening to underneath us talking is one of his songs. If people want to get in touch with us and send us their Twilight Zone inspired trap rap, their coke rap projects, Please do. John, how can they do it?
You can send us an email at twilightpwn, pwn@gmail.com. You can get in touch with us on Twitter at twilightpwn. You can check out our website, twilightpwn.tumblr.com, where we put up pictures of things we find or create related to the episodes we talk about. You could listen to us on Stitcher or TuneIn Radio, or you could subscribe to us in iTunes. And if you're in there, if you leave us a rating or a review, we would really appreciate it. Special thanks to K Moffat 1279 and the Wilster and for leaving some reviews recently.
Wasn't K Moffat the one who said, like, y'all got some fans in Theodore, Alabama? Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the regionalism of if anyone leaves an iTunes review, definitely like say where you're writing from and include some charming local color if you possibly can.
Well, Fred, you probably will just want to mute for a second here,
Okay.
but our Alabama listener was nice enough to say "Roll Tide," so as a Oklahoma boy, I just want to say "Boomer Sooner" back at him. Had a good time in the bowl last year. All right, we can move on.
Was that the Red River Shootout?
No, Fred.
Oh, sorry. That's the one college football rivalry I'm vaguely aware of.
Red River Shootout is OU versus Texas. It's an annual thing,
I
but
see.
Alabama and OU happened to meet in the bowl last year.
And meanwhile, to our British listeners, the North London derby was a cracker last week. All right, cool.
Exactly.
All right, well, I'll talk to you next week, John, if
All right.
you can bear to converse with someone with such a divergent opinion on and when the sky was opened up.
I'm gonna need at least a week to cool off from this heated debate.
All right. Talk to you then.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.